She let a desperate college student stay with her. What happened next altered her future. Have you ever felt so utterly alone in your own home that the silence itself becomes a heavy, suffocating weight? That's exactly where I was, stuck in a quiet routine, until one rainy afternoon, a stranger appeared on my garden wall. He looked as lost and broken as I felt. What happened next wasn't just a simple act of kindness. It was a profound transformation that would forever change both our lives, stitching warmth back into the cold corners of my house and my heart. My name is Claire Bennett, and for nearly 4 years, my 2-story stone house in the peaceful little town of Willillaford had been a sanctuary of quiet. But the kind of quiet that echoed Peter's absence. My husband had passed away, and while I'd adjusted to living alone, those moments when the silence pressed in like a tangible presence were the hardest. Most days the only sounds were the soft rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock or the faint, distant hum of a car on the cobbled main street. On that late September afternoon, the air was crisp and cool, the sky a somber gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I was returning from the local market, my wicker basket swaying gently at my side, when I spotted him. A young man, barely more than a boy, sat on the low stone wall that marked the edge of my small front garden. His shoulders were hunched, his jeans damp at the knees, and a worn leather satchel rested beside him. He looked as though he'd been there for hours, lost in thought or perhaps just lost. I slowed my pace, my usual reserve giving way to a sudden, almost maternal curiosity. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice perhaps carrying more warmth than I intended. He looked up, startled, his head snapping towards me. "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to linger. I was just taking a rest." There was a blend of embarrassment and profound exhaustion in his voice. Up close, I could see he was no older than 22, with neatly kept brown hair that fell just over his tired eyes. Those eyes, though, they held a depth that spoke of too many sleepless nights, too much worry. "Long day?" I asked gently, trying to put him at ease. He hesitated, then nodded, a faint, weary sigh escaping him. "Long week, actually. I'm Daniel Parker." He continued, glancing away as if ashamed. "I was staying in student housing for college, but they told me I had to leave. Couldn't keep up with the rent." An unexpected pang hit me in the chest. I remembered my own student days many years ago, the precarious tightrope walk between pride and desperation, trying to make ends meet. "So where are you staying now?" Daniel let out a short, forced laugh that didn't quite sound casual. "Nowhere really. Just hoping to find something before it gets dark." The clouds overhead shifted, growing darker, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering on the pavement around us. Without even thinking, the words were out of my mouth. "You can't sit out here all afternoon in the rain. I have a spare room upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's warm, and the roof doesn't leak." He blinked at me, his tired eyes widening as if I just offered him a slice of the moon. "That's very kind, but I don't think I can afford." "We'll sort that out later," I interrupted briskly, cutting through his polite protest. "Come on, you'll catch your death out here." 5 minutes later, Daniel stood in my entryway, water dripping from his hair onto the old Persian rug that Peter had loved so much. I fetched a soft towel from the linen closet and handed it to him. "Upstairs," I said, pointing toward the narrow, winding staircase. "First door on the right. It's furnished bed, desk, wardrobe. The bathroom's next to it. You can pay what you can manage when you can manage." He took the towel, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, a quiet disbelief. "Thank you. Honestly, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I replied with a small, comforting smile. "Just get yourself dry and warm." As Daniel disappeared up the stairs, his footsteps light and hesitant, I set my market basket on the kitchen counter. The rain began to patter softly against the windows, a gentle rhythm filling the sudden quiet. And for the first time in years, the house felt different. Not just mine anymore. Not just an echoing shell of memories, but alive again. A little spark of warmth ignited in the hollow space Peter had left. I didn't know why I'd offered the room so quickly, why I'd trusted a complete stranger. But as I listened to the faint sounds of movement above, I felt a quiet, almost forgotten sense of contentment bloom in my chest. Upstairs, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, the towel draped around his shoulders, the tension in his young body easing for the first time in what felt like days, maybe weeks. He glanced around the modest but clean room, then closed his eyes. It wasn't just a place to sleep. Felt like a second chance. A lifeline. In the days that followed, Daniel settled quietly into the upstairs room. A faint, almost imperceptible presence. He kept mostly to himself at first, coming and going with the measured politeness of someone deeply afraid of overstaying his welcome. Mornings were always early for him. By the time I was up and making my usual pot of Earl Grey tea, he had already left for classes at Westfield College. His routine quickly became a precise, quiet rhythm in the house. Home just after 5, a quick change, and then off again to his part-time job at a small independent bookstore in the center of Willillaford. Some nights he returned well past 9, looking utterly exhausted but carrying the faint, comforting scent of old books and rain on his coat. I wasn't one for fussing, nor had I had anyone to fuss over in so long, but it became impossible not to notice little things. The way he sometimes slipped out without breakfast, or how his portion at dinner would be noticeably smaller when we happened to eat together. At first, I thought it was simply habit, perhaps a student's ingrained frugality. But one evening, as I carried a tray of tea to the living room, I caught a glimpse of his dinner plate in the sink, barely touched. My stomach clenched with a familiar ache of concern. The next day I found out why. I'd returned from the post office earlier than expected and saw him at the kitchen counter, hunched over, carefully counting coins into a small, worn envelope. "Is that for rent?" I asked lightly, though my heart already suspected the truth. He shook his head, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. "No, my mom's not been well. Medicine's expensive and, well, I try to send her something each week." I leaned against the door frame, a wave of empathy washing over me. "And what about you, Daniel? Are you eating properly?" Daniel gave a faint, almost apologetic smile, that weary kindness in his eyes again. "I'll manage, Claire. I always do." Later that week, a storm rolled in, a fierce blustery thing with sheets of rain hammering against the windows and the wind rattling the garden gate so violently it sounded like a ghost trying to get in. It was nearly midnight when I heard the front door open, followed by a series of drips. Daniel stepped inside, drenched from head to toe, water streaming from his hair onto the rug. "Good heavens, Daniel!" I exclaimed, rushing to fetch a towel. "What on earth happened?" He laughed quietly, a soft, self-deprecating sound, shaking the water from his jacket. "The bus was late. I had my umbrella, but there was this old man at the stop. He didn't have one. Couldn't just leave him there." I stared at him for a moment, a warmth spreading through me before handing over the towel. "You're impossible," I muttered, though there was no bite in my words, only affection. The next morning I noticed his shoes by the door still damp, the worn leather stiffening in the cold. Without telling him, I set them by the fire to dry and, almost instinctively, slipped a folded 20-pound note into his satchel. When he later found it, I simply told him I must have overpaid him for picking up my groceries. He didn't argue, but I saw the faint flicker of understanding, and something more in his eyes. Over the following weeks my quiet gestures continued. I'd buy extra milk and bread by accident, knowing it would save him a trip. I replaced the worn blanket on his bed with a thick, warm, wool one I hadn't used since Peter. I even mended a tear in his winter coat while he was at work, a small, almost forgotten domestic act that felt surprisingly good. Daniel noticed it all, though he never said much. But in his own way, he returned the kindness, shoveling snow from the path before I woke, repairing the leaky kitchen tap without being asked, and carrying heavy logs in for the fireplace, anticipating the chill before I even felt it. One crisp Saturday morning, I found him sweeping leaves off the front path, the rhythmic swish of the broom a comforting sound. "You don't have to do that, you know," I said, opening the door wider. "I don't mind," he replied, smiling faintly, a genuine, easy smile this time. "It's nice to keep things tidy. Helps clear my head." That afternoon, I invited him in for tea. We sat at the kitchen table, steam curling up from our mugs, the scent of Earl Grey filling the air, mingling with the subtle aroma of the gingerbread I'd baked. It started with small talk, the weather, a new book at the shop, the quirks of the old house, but gradually the conversation deepened. Daniel spoke about growing up in a quiet farming village, the stark contrast of Willillaford's bustling student life. He talked about his dreams, his passion for sustainable urban planning, his quiet determination to make a difference. I in turn found myself sharing stories from my own youth, the dreams I once had of becoming a writer, the paths life had taken me down. Over the weeks, these tea-time conversations became a quiet, cherished ritual. Sometimes we laughed, the sound echoing a joyful cadence in the house. Sometimes we simply sat in companionable silence, the warmth between us needing no words. I began to see Daniel less as a tenant, and more as a younger brother, someone to look out for, but also someone whose vibrant presence made my home feel truly alive again. Daniel, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. There was something about my steady kindness, the unjudgmental space I offered, that made him feel safe, like he belonged. One evening after sharing tea and ginger biscuits, Daniel lingered in the doorway before heading upstairs. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I really appreciate you letting me stay here. I don't know what I'd have done without you." I gave a small smile, the kind that reached my eyes. "We all need a bit of help sometimes, Daniel. And besides," I added softly, "it's nice having someone around." That night as he lay in bed, Daniel stared at the faint moonlight spilling across the ceiling. He thought about the long cold evenings he might have spent wandering the streets if not for my unexpected offer. And as he closed his eyes, a fierce, quiet promise formed in his mind. One day he would find a way to repay her kindness, a way she would never forget. By midwinter, the snow in Willilafort had softened into a damp chill, the kind that seeped into one's bones. The days were short, the skies often gray, but inside my home there was a steady warmth. The warmth from the crackling fire, from the smell of baking bread, and from the growing companionship between Daniel and me. It was on one such evening, as I was setting a freshly baked loaf to cool on the kitchen counter, that Daniel came in, his cheeks pink from the cold, and his eyes alight in a way I hadn't seen before. "I've been shortlisted," he said, almost breathless, his voice bubbling with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. I looked up from slicing the bread. "Shortlisted for what, dear?" "For the National Scholars Presentation. It's in a month in Kingsford. They choose the top students from colleges all over to present research projects. If I do well, it could mean funding for the rest of my degree, maybe even a placement after graduation." He practically vibrated with suppressed energy. I felt a rush of pride for him, a warmth that settled deep in my chest. "That's wonderful, Daniel. What will you present?" "My paper on sustainable urban planning," he said, though his voice faltered slightly, a shadow crossing his face. "The only problem is there's a travel fee, plus materials for my presentation. It's more than I can manage right now." He looked at me, a familiar flash of worry in his eyes. I didn't even hesitate. "Then I'll cover it." His eyes widened and he started to protest. "Claire, I can't let you." "You can," I interrupted gently, my voice firm but kind. "And you will. This isn't charity, Daniel. Think of it as an investment in someone with a real talent, someone who wants to make a difference." For a moment, he said nothing. His expression caught somewhere between overwhelming gratitude and sheer disbelief. Then he smiled, a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes. "All right," he conceded, "but only if you let me pay you back someday." "Deal," I replied, though we both knew I didn't care if the money ever returned. From that night on, the evenings in the living room became a shared project, alive with purpose. Daniel would spread his meticulously organized notes across the old oak coffee table, and I would listen patiently as he rehearsed his presentation. Sometimes I'd interrupt with a thoughtful question, born of years of quiet observation, and a deep intuitive understanding of people. Other times I'd suggest a clearer way to phrase his points, a more impactful pause, or a stronger emphasis on a key idea. My feedback wasn't just polite. It was sharp, insightful, the kind of input that pushed him to refine his work to truly shine. "You'd have made a fine lecturer yourself, Claire," he told me once as I adjusted a line in his opening statement, making it more concise and powerful. I laughed. "Too late for that. I'm happy being your audience." The neighbors began to notice the change in the house. Mrs. Godfrey from next door mentioned over the garden wall that I seemed lighter somehow. The postman commented on how often he heard laughter from my living room window, and I realized he was right. I did feel lighter. Watching Daniel throw himself into the work, seeing his confidence grow, witnessing his passion ignite, it brought me a kind of joy, a sense of quiet purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was like tending a small precious flame, watching it grow brighter. The day of the trip arrived before she knew it. Daniel stood in the hallway, smartly dressed in a navy suit we had chosen together from a second-hand shop. The morning light caught the neat fold of his tie, the shine of his polished shoes. "Ready?" I asked, handing him a paper bag with sandwiches and a flask of hot tea. "Just in case." He nodded, but I caught the flicker of nerves in his eyes. "More than ready, but I'll be glad when it's over." At the station, I stood on the platform as the train pulled in, its great steel body rumbling. Daniel turned back just before boarding, his eyes meeting mine. "Claire, whatever happens, thank you for everything." I smiled, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was swelling with a mixture of pride and anxiety. "Go and show them what you're made of." As the train pulled away, a great metallic sigh, I stayed until the last carriage disappeared. The platform felt quieter without him, and I realized I'd be counting the days until his triumphant return. The first evening without Daniel in the house felt strange. The quiet settled in again, But it was a different kind of quiet now, tinged with his absence rather than Peter's. I'd grown used to the faint creak of the stairs when he came home late, the muffled clink of a cup in the kitchen, or the low hum of his voice when he spoke on the phone to his mother. Now the room seemed to echo with stillness, but a stillness I knew would soon be broken. I tried to distract myself, ironing, reorganizing the pantry, even baking a small batch of scones, but my mind kept drifting to him. Was the presentation going well? Did he arrive safely? Was he eating properly? The first day passed without any message. By the second, I convinced myself he was simply busy, lost in the intensity of the competition. By the third, my unease settled into a constant, dull ache in my chest. What if something went wrong? What if he hadn't done as well as he hoped? On the fourth morning, I tried calling him. The phone rang, a hollow, insistent sound, until it went to voicemail. "It's me," I said into the receiver, trying to keep my voice light, to mask the tremor of worry beneath it. "Just wondering how it's going. No rush. Call when you can." Hours later, still no reply. I checked the time difference between Willillaford and Kingsford. No excuse there. I even considered calling the college, but decided I might be overreacting, a nervous old woman fussing. Still, that night, I found myself glancing out of the living room window every time headlights passed on the road. A foolish hope that it might be him. It was the fifth evening when my phone finally buzzed, startling me out of my quiet vigil. A short text appeared on the screen. "Back tomorrow evening. Please be at home." No explanation, no detail. My relief was immediate, a wave washing over me so profound it almost brought me to my knees. But so was my curiosity. Why so brief? Why the insistence that I be home? What did it all mean? I spent most of the next day keeping myself busy, a whirlwind of nervous energy. I dusted the living room shelves until they gleamed, polished the brass handles on the kitchen cupboards until they shone like gold, even took a walk to the market to pick up fresh lamb for roasting. I also stopped at the bakery for a Victoria sponge cake, his favorite, telling myself it would be a welcome home treat, though my hands trembled slightly as I carried it. As the afternoon faded, I set the dining table for two, using Peter's best china, lighting the candles I usually saved for Christmas or very special occasions. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering amber glow across the room, chasing away the shadows. Outside, the sky deepened into a rich, velvety navy. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 6 times. I was in the kitchen checking the roast, its savory aroma filling the house, when I heard the sound I'd been waiting for all week. The familiar click of the front gate. My heart leapt, a sudden joyful flutter. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and turned just as the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his eyes brighter, more alive than I'd ever seen them. He was holding something behind his back, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile that was half mischief, half pure triumph. "You made it back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even as a wave of profound relief washed over me. "I told you I would," he replied, stepping closer, his presence filling the room in a way that chased away any lingering loneliness. "I brought something with me." "What is it?" I asked, a hopeful tremor in my voice. "You'll see," he said, that grin widening, revealing the sheer joy bubbling within him. "But not yet. First, I want to say," he paused as though gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with care. "Claire, the past few months you've been more than a landlord. You've been a friend, family even. And I've wanted to find a way to thank you properly. A way that truly shows what your kindness has meant." I felt my throat tighten, tears pricking at my eyes. "Daniel, wait," he said gently, stepping closer, still holding whatever it was hidden behind him. "I think tonight's the night you'll understand exactly what I mean." And with that, he stepped fully into the firelight, his eyes shining, ready to reveal the surprise he had carried all the way home. Daniel stepped forward, the firelight casting his shadow long and dancing across the living room wall. Slowly, deliberately, he brought his hands from behind his back, revealing a sleek black frame wrapped in a simple gold ribbon. Inside it, nestled against a deep blue background, was a crisp certificate, embossed with a majestic seal and bold, elegant lettering at the top. My eyes widened, a gasp catching in my throat. "Daniel, is that—" "I won," he said, his voice trembling just slightly with an emotion so profound it made my own chest ache. "First place. The judges called it one of the best presentations they've ever seen, Claire. They really did." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small gleaming medal attached to a deep blue ribbon. "This came with it." I covered my mouth with both hands, a mixture of laughter and tears threatening to spill out all at once. "Oh, Daniel, that's absolutely incredible." But he wasn't finished. He set the medal gently on the mantelpiece, where it caught the flicker of the firelight, a beacon of his triumph. Then, with a slow, purposeful movement, he took out a plain white envelope from his inner jacket pocket. He held it out to me, and as my fingers brushed against it, I could feel the crisp weight of the paper inside, a palpable density. "What's this?" I asked, frowning slightly, a new wave of curiosity, tinged with a little apprehension washing over me. "My prize money," he said, his voice now steady, clear. "It's enough to pay you back for the rent, for the travel, for the materials, for the lamb and the cake, for everything you've done, Claire." "Before you say anything," he raised a hand, stopping me as I started to protest, "I know you didn't help me for money. I know that with every fiber of my being. But I need you to understand. You gave me more than a place to sleep. You gave me a chance to keep going when I was ready to give up. You gave me belief when I had none left. This," he gestured to the envelope, "this is my way of showing you that it mattered, that your kindness echoed in my life." I stared at the envelope, my vision blurring with unshed tears. The generosity, the thoughtfulness of his gesture. It was overwhelming. "Daniel, I never wanted." I stopped, taking a shaky breath, unable to articulate the depth of my emotion. "You don't owe me anything. Not now, not ever." "I know," he said softly, his voice full of quiet understanding. "That's why I'm giving it to you. Because you never asked for it. Because you're the reason this happened at all." I finally opened the envelope and saw the neat stack of notes inside, crisp and new. The reality of it settled in my chest, a profound warmth. But it wasn't the money that moved me. It was the fact that he had carried this thought, this deep desire to show his gratitude, all the way through, from the moment he'd first stepped into my house, damp and tired, to this evening by the fire. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the comfortable silence. Then I gently set the envelope on the coffee table and picked up the shining metal instead, turning it over in my fingers. "This," I said, my voice steady now, thick with emotion. "This belongs here." I hung it from a small, ornate hook on the mantelpiece, right next to Peter's old pipe, where it caught the flicker of the firelight, a bright new star in the quiet room. Daniel smiled, a broad, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "So you're keeping it?" "Of course I am. It's a reminder," I said, my voice rich with gratitude, "that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is simply open your door. Open your heart." We moved to the dining table where the roast lamb waited, its savory scent mingling with the faint sweetness of the Victoria sponge cake. The candles flickered softly, casting dancing shadows, and the room was warm golden, filled with a newfound joy. Over dinner we talked about everything, the intensity of the trip, the challenge of the presentation, the judge's surprisingly sharp questions, the long, triumphant train ride home. Daniel's words tumbled out in excited, passionate bursts, and I listened, feeling as though I were witnessing not just a victory, but the exhilarating unfolding of a life that had only just begun to truly bloom. When the plates were cleared and the fire burned low, casting long, comforting shadows, Daniel looked across the table at me, his gaze steady and warm. "I'm not going anywhere, you know," he said quietly. "Not unless you throw me out." I chuckled, the sound light and free. "You'd have to do something pretty awful for that to happen, Daniel. And I don't think you have it in you." We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us now warm and full, the kind shared by people who know they've become family in everything but name. Outside, the night settled gently over Willillaford. The cobbled streets were hushed, the air still and crisp. Inside, the little stone house glowed with the kind of light that no lamp could create. The steady, enduring light of kindness returned, of a profound and unexpected friendship, a connection that would last a lifetime. This story has truly touched my heart, and I hope it has yours too. It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes, the greatest acts of kindness aren't grand gestures, but simple open-hearted offers to someone in need, and that found family forged in shared moments and mutual respect can be just as strong, if not stronger than blood. Have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness that changed your life? Or found a family in people you never expected? What moment in this story resonated most with you? Please share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. I'd absolutely love to hear them.